Until Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the consensus in Finland was that it wasn't necessary to join NATO. Since the Second World War, when Finland was temporarily occupied by Russia, the country developed and maintained the highest level of defence protection through public vigilance and deterrence, with a well-funded military which has conscription for young men for at least 1 year's mandatory service. Even throughout the peaceful post-Soviet era, Finland never let its guard down. Now, in this moment of untold volatility, Europe is hoping to learn from Finnish preparedness.
Finnish border guards have to be prepared for any low-level incident, but also including a full-scale invasion. This is Finnish territory, but also NATO territory. Also, not too far away from here is Russia's nuclear deterrence.
It's part of defense system of Finland, so we prepared also to part of Finnish territorial defense.
And what does that mean?
For example, we train our conscripts for our reserve, which is a useful tool if necessary on the wartime.
So basically a full-scale invasion?
Yeah, that's correct.
On the Russian border, conscripts are trained for the wide gamut of roles in the army, including sniper or marksman.
I've never held a rifle in my life, so first time shooting was in the army. You start off with the basic assault rifle, and I found out in the army that I have a gift for shooting. So that's how I got into this marksman.
Russian aggression in Ukraine has had dire consequences for the indigenous Sami people who are native to Russia, Finland and Norway. Finland's Sami people have had to cut ties from their Russian brethren, many of whom were forced into the Russian army to attack Ukraine.
One of the terrible things is that some of the Sami brothers on the Russian side have been forcibly conscripted to the Russian army and sent to the war front in Ukraine. And we have also lost at least, I think, 7 Sami young men. And it's a huge loss in a small community, about 2,000.
Europe now acknowledges the transatlantic alliance is not as viable as it once was. The US is now calling for Europe to help its war efforts in Iran, or risk them pulling completely away from helping Ukraine with military intelligence as it defends itself from Russia.
Ukraine is not a bargaining chip. As I said, a shift of attention also from the US would be a huge mistake. But what we have to do is to continue to convince the US that they have to be engaged to help Ukraine, and we have to do our job also to reinforce our support to Ukraine from the military, financial perspective.
Finland's border guard stretches 1,350 kilometres with Russia, the largest inside NATO, but the Finns say they're ready for anything. Shona Murray, Euronews, Giuseppe, Finland.
Kyiv has agreed to provide Gulf countries with its complete air defense system, including maritime drones, electronic warfare and interception technology against Iranian drones. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky unveiled what he called historic agreements on his way back from his visit of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar and Jordan.
Ми домовляємось про домовились про стратегічне співробітництво в напрямку Мілтек і в інших напрямках. Ми говоримо про десятирічні договори.
Zelensky added that Ukraine is willing to share its expertise in unblocking maritime trade routes with naval drones. In 2022, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, signed by Russia, Ukraine, Turkey and the UN, unblocked the export of grain from Ukrainian ports.
Ми ділилися досвідом Чорноморського коридору, як він функціонує. Вони розуміють, що це дуже продуктивно вийшло у наших Збройних сил розблокувати Чорноморський коридор. Ми ділимося цими деталями.
The deals with the Gulf countries are an opportunity for Kyiv to open its arms exports on a global scale. Spain has banned US military aircraft involved in the Iran war from using its airspace and military bases. The ban extends an earlier restriction that applied only to 2 American installations on Spanish soil and now covers the entire country.
España no va a autorizar en ningún caso, ni lo ha hecho, ni lo hace, ni lo hará, la utilización de las bases de Rota y Morón para ir a una guerra contra la que estamos totalmente en contra, en la que no creemos, que nos parece profundamente ilegal y profundamente injusta.
The restrictions have been communicated to US forces from the outset and are not a sudden policy shift, she stressed. Foreign Minister José Manuel Alvarez added Madrid would block any US flights linked to the conflict from entering Spanish airspace. The US did not immediately comment, but US President Donald Trump has threatened earlier this month to cut off all trade with Spain over its refusal to allow the bases to be used for Iran operations. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has taken a stance against the war in Iran, led by the United States and Israel, calling it an extraordinary mistake.
US President Donald Trump has threatened to destroy Iran's oil export hub of Karg Island, along with other oil wells and power plants, if Tehran does not agree to end the war soon. He wrote on his Truth social network that the United States is in, quote, serious discussions with a more reasonable regime. About 90% of Iran's crude oil exports leave the country via Karg Island, much of it destined for China and other Asian markets. Any attack on its energy infrastructure could have serious consequences for global oil markets that have already been pushed to the brink. Meanwhile, a fire broke out on Monday at an oil refinery in the northern Israeli city of Haifa for the second time during the month-long war with Iran. Images showed flames on a large refinery tank with thick black smoke that was quickly extinguished by Israel's fire and rescue services. It wasn't clear if it was a missile strike or debris from the interception that caused the blaze. The attack comes as Israel launched attacks targeting Iran's South Pars natural gas field.
Syrian interim President Ahmed al-Shara has been invited to talks with the German government on Monday. He was first received by Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. Federal Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Foreign Minister Johann Wadepool also met the Syrian ruler. This is despite critics accusing al-Shara of serious crimes against minorities in Syria. Last weekend, armed Islamists are said to have attacked Christian shops. In western Syria, the attackers also tried to set fire to several houses. Since the fall of the dictator Assad in December 2024, attacks on Alevis, Druze, Kurds and Christians in Syria have been on the rise. Government spokesman Stefan Cornelius rejected criticism of the visit on Friday. It was very important to exchange views with the leaders of this region. We have interest there, Cornelius told journalists. The agenda includes the situation in the region and the domestic political situation in Syria, explained Cornelius. The coexistence of the various ethnic groups is also a topic, as the return of Syrians. Heavy rains have caused widespread flooding in several regions of Russia's North Caucasus. Dagestan and Chechnya were hit hardest, where massive evacuations took place. In Makashkala, water flooded streets, rescuers carried out children and the elderly, while residents tried to save documents and belongings. Many said the flood came suddenly and literally swept away everything in its path.
Меня чуть оттолкнуло, и я уже не смогла ничего. Документы там, все там.
The Dagestan authorities have declared a state of emergency. Bridges have been damaged and more than 130 settlements are without electricity. According to the authorities, more than 3,300 people have been evacuated in the region. In rural areas, the water rose so high that it reached the animals' chest. Residents and their livestock were led to higher ground. A state of emergency is also in effect in Chechnya, where local services continue to pump out water and clear roads. Rivers that burst their banks destroyed roads and flooded hundreds of homes. In the Gudermes district, one of the hardest hit areas, about 500 people have been evacuated. According to weather forecasters, the intensity of the rains decreased by Sunday evening, but the full extent of the damage has yet to be assessed.
The Paris-Berlin night train has made a comeback. It has made its first journey on the new route relaunched by the Dutch-Belgian company European Sleeper without public money. The first travelers to arrive in the German capital described it as more environmentally friendly than flying and cozy.
I prefer to take the train because I like to avoid flying for environmental reasons. And secondly, taking the night train, it just saves time. You know, I mean, well, obviously it takes the time, but you travel while you sleep and then the day is there to enjoy.
Eh ben, finalement, oui, peut-être que ça se voit pas ma tête, mais on a bien dormi, c'était chouette.
The comeback fills the gap left by the discontinuation of the Paris-Berlin and Paris-Vienna night trains, which have been briefly relaunched by the SNCF, Deutsche Bahn and ÖBB in 2023.
Italian police have confirmed the robbery of several paintings worth millions of euros at a museum near the northern city of Parma 1 week ago. Among the pieces of art stolen were paintings by Cézanne, Matisse and Renoir. Local media reported that the four thieves were able to force a door open before stealing the paintings and escaping across the museum gardens. The heist took place in under 3 minutes and bears similarities with the high-profile robbery that rocked the Louvre Museum in Paris last October. Police have stated they believe a, quote, structured and organized gang is responsible for the theft.